the host, right? That you can screen share.
Yes, I can share my screen. It's going to be, I'm excited. It's the first time I ever share my screen on Zoom. So, but it says share screen, so hopefully it'll work.
Yes, if it doesn't work, I think you have to go to settings and allow, but sure, yeah, should be.
I have meeting, start share, so I guess that should work. Yeah. And I see some signs of life in the chat. So since it's already 8:16, I will just begin. And if anybody misses anything, they can just go back to the recording, especially since we had the technical issues and we are a bit later than planned and scheduled. So to anybody that doesn't know, my name is Bosque. It is a nickname. In Spanish, it means forest. I live in northern Spain. If any of you are familiar with Galicia or El Camino de Santiago, which is quite famous in Europe, I live right next to the Camino de Santiago, near Santiago de Compostela. And I've been involved in the sort of permaculture, forest gardening, counterculture, alternative scene here for about 10 years now. But I'm actually originally from New York and lived there my whole life before I was here in Spain. So yeah, I've been very much involved in the whole organic forest gardening scene. We have probably one of the more developed and established forest gardens here probably on the Iberian Peninsula. But then I've also been very involved with sort of the arts, as well as sort of group work, like the world of like group dynamics, group games, whether it's something like biodanza, which is similar to ecstatic dance, or the work that reconnects by Joanna Macy, or natural mindfulness, the work of Joseph Cornell. And basically along these 10 years in this sort of intersection. Oh, and the third thing I've been involved with is very much therapy and the healing of trauma. I've had quite a journey in that respect as well. So being kind of in these three worlds, which is like the performing arts and group work, and then therapy and mental health, and then sort of ecology and forest gardening. I've been sort of just, it wasn't anything intentional. I came up with these two projects, which I'll explain now for the next few minutes, that sort of just came to me from these experiences, sort of as like a response to these experiences that I was having in these alternative circles, trying basically a little bit of anything, like anything you can think of related to spirituality or mental health or ecology or permaculture, or, you know, anything, or like politically very active. I pretty much tried. So basically my experience in all these circles brought me to these two projects, which are different but sort of intertwined, and I really can't think of one without the other, so they're kind of like bonded. So I'll just begin with like a short introduction of what each one is, because they're both dealing with similar issues, which is, they're both dealing with similar issues, but from different perspectives. So to put it quickly, we had a very nice preparation with the talk on the Kogi. And at the end of that talk, Lucas mentioned this idea of the first world, the second world, and the third world, right? And how do we figure out this new world where we're not quite living an indigenous lifestyle because it might not be possible, but we don't want to live in techno-industrial, crazy, hierarchical capitalism either. And so the sort of cultural experimentation that we need to come up with these new sort of earth-centered, healthy, eco-aware, trauma-aware cultures that we need, it doesn't happen with a snap of the fingers, and it doesn't happen through just talking and discussion. So thinking about those issues, I came up with these two projects, which is Foresnauts, which is a term you've probably never heard because I made it up, and then Livio games, which is another term that you've probably never heard because I also made it up. And Foresnauts are more of an individual experience, and Livio gaming is more of a collective experience. So I'll start with Foresnauts. Foresnauts, to give a simple definition, are people who discover new planets right here on Mother Earth, which is similar to what Lucas was talking about with the third world. It is a sort of symbiosis of permaculture and sacred land practices, as well as, I would say, soul work in an individual, by which we are engaging in the world and learning to communicate with land, learning to communicate with the environment by basically reestablishing and re-acknowledging animism, which now has lots of other funny technical names, and all kinds of scientists now saying that yes, probably everything is imbued with consciousness. If anyone has a question about anything I talk about, feel free to interrupt. I'm just going to assume that more or less everyone has heard the term animism and knows what it is. But recognizing that we are wounded Westerners and, you know, white, most of us, this isn't something where, you know, we have this ability to communicate with nature established. We've lost the ability, and we don't always have, and we don't have a school. So Lucas mentioned the school. I don't think that all of the billions of us that are living in technological civilization are going to be able to access schools to sort of be taught those skills. So it's kind of a way for those of us who are maybe generations and generations and generations removed from our pagan ancestors to kind of reestablish that connection with land and nature and the environment and the gods and the mythology that's present out there on the landscape. So Foresnauts are kind of these ambassadors to land, communicating, finding the stories that are out there on the land, understanding the land both from that mythological perspective and also from a ecological perspective as well. So they have both sides. And what they're figuring out is kind of being the opposite of colonists. It's like the opposite of being a pioneer. It's rather than the cowboy energy that's looking out to the horizon and saying, there's got to be more out there for me to conquer. There's got to be more resources out there, like out there. It's more of a yin approach. It's more, how can, where I am now, where I am here, how can I serve this place, help improve it, and explore it in time rather than in space, which means you're helping and watching it grow and regenerate, rather than going out somewhere that's pristine and destroying it or conquering it. You're taking somewhere degraded and maybe overused, and you're helping it restore itself, with the caveat of consent, if the land wants to be part of us and wants that regeneration. So the Foresnaut has this discernment of, these places would like to be a part of humanity and be part of our community and maybe be cultivated or have some other sort of project built on it. Other lands would like to be left untouched. And this has precedent, having studied anthropology sort of amateurly. I've seen a lot of examples of like indigenous peoples and traditional peoples recognizing that there is a place where human beings are meant to be with nature and develop that for their needs. And there's also other places that are just meant to be untouched and be the wilds. So the Foresnauts is kind of returning to that tradition, instead of just basically having anything we buy is for us and we can do whatever we want. So it's overturning that sort of property and conquest and colonization paradigm. So when the Foresnaut finds places, which could be places where we are already present, that would like to be more engaged with humanity, then these are places that are suitable for cultural experimentation. So what I mean by cultural experimentation is sort of all the things that in modern civilization are sort of missing. Dan and I sometimes talk about Terence McKenna, and he's famous for saying that culture is not your friend. But my interpretation was that dominator culture, hierarchical culture, controlling culture, industrial culture is not your friend. But there are many cases where cultures can be healthy and actually provide for the human needs of the development of their soul, provide the situations and the stories and the initiations necessary for someone to develop and mature into an adult. because what I would consider is that most of us are perpetual adolescents. It's one of the problems of modern day society, that we're all still psychologically adolescents. We haven't gone through initiation and rite of passage and become adults who know their purpose on this planet and serve this planet, rather than just living a sort of eco-centered lifestyle, to put it very briefly. And so that's where Livio gaming comes in. Livio gaming is just, for me, is just applying play to cultural experimentation in these settings of nature that are kind of supporting us. There's this famous theorist who's like a theater director. He calls it the magic circle, where when we are in the state of play or pretend or theater, we feel like more things are permitted. The rules that we were raised with and programmed with kind of fall to the side, and more playful and more imaginative and more freeing. So it's almost like playing a character in order to be more who we really are. So Livio gaming is a sort of theatrical play system, an adventure system that takes place in nature, but then can have a lot, it's as varied as video games or board games would be, whereas there's a lot of different things that you can do. Because the way I started it was seeing how a lot of the tasks and activities that you would do in organic gardening or permaculture or forest gardening could be sort of gamified and made more fun, and help people like feel like more purpose. So I started working with like young people and kids, and I would just make gardening activities. I would turn them into quests, and then I would make stories up and do that with them. So it's kind of taking the aspects that are missing of culture, taking the things that we need to do in culture that are missing, and gamifying them so that we can experiment with it, because we are lost and we're not exactly sure what we're doing, because we're generations removed from what I would consider like healthy cultures. So this applies to, for example, addressing all of the ancestral and generational trauma that we've accumulated both to ourselves and to the land. This involves understanding that we are domesticated beings and that we need to rewild ourselves, which means, you know, becoming closer to your senses, closer to your authentic self, actually connected to the environment you live in. There is the issue of our culture lacking a direction for us. Obviously, the old paradigm was like, you know, you have a family, you have a job, you work hard, you accumulate things, you go up the ladder, you feel better. Now the whole what is your purpose, what is your purpose, what is your purpose thing is getting popular, but not from a place of deep understanding. So for that, we have things like death psychology and mythology and mytho-poetics to help us understand our soul and how it fits into this wonderful planet. There's all kinds of ego issues we have, but I don't really like using the word ego. I like using the word subpersonalities. So we have subpersonalities, which could be, you know, our defense mechanisms, our protectors, our addicts, the ones who addict to things, our escapists who avoid situations. And these are kind of how we're operating on in life. And so it's moving from a culture that is subpersonality or ego-based into a culture that is more authentic and more soul-centered, so that we're interacting more authentically. And so that's where the games come in, so we can actually learn to do that. So we deal with interpersonal and intrapersonal issues, but like basically through fantasy. So somebody wrote something. Cool. And this is kind of just my introductory speech, and then you guys are free to ask whatever you want. So yeah, it's like creatively playing with the aspects of culture that we're missing, the kind of blind spots in civilization, especially like trauma, lack of ecological awareness, these sort of issues. And then playing with them in mythological settings, especially in nature, to support us. So for example, let's say you have an issue with not feeling like you're a good speaker and you can't speak out loud. And then, so in the quest that you're given, you have to give an important speech to save a lost soul. This lost soul is a soul that's on the land, like a spirit of the land that's been hurt, very hurt, and needs to hear like a beautiful poem sung to it to feel better. But you have this issue and fear that you're afraid to sing. So maybe you ask for help from a certain plant, which also relates back to herbalism as well, because plants, like she said, have personalities. You can maybe speak with a plant who is very good at speaking out loud or unafraid to say its voice, and then interact with it, dialogue with it, have an experience in it within the game, which I have a lot of delivery systems for these games for how they will work, both using technology and not using technology. And then maybe you go through this sort of process where you like get this power from the plant, and it helps you like realize this power of being able to speak poetically. The land spirit is helped through your poetic speaking, and we sort of also regain a lost piece of culture, which for me is like blessing and praising. Like we don't do that anymore. And a lot of indigenous traditional peoples, like they're very much blessing, praising, thanking, gratitude type of peoples, but very much in connection to nature, not just like the sort of like spiritual gratitude of like thankful for everything, but more of like a poetic praising of all the beings that are providing the wonderful things we need. So yeah, LARPing is definitely an inspiration. There's a lot of inspirations for sure. And basically, that's the best I could do for like a quick summary.